So typically what I do in these meetings is I try to go over any general information I think everybody needs to know. And then so in the past, students have asked me to do maybe a short little, I won't call it a lecture, but a short little lesson on the topics. And then we usually kind of open it up to if students have any questions specifically about some of the homework or other questions, general questions as well. That's typically what we do. What I find is a lot of times, you know, the students who take the time to come to these class meetings have specific questions, so I don't want to miss out on those. So okay. let me start with just a couple of general topics, and I put them in the announcements, but sometimes people miss the announcements. So the first one is that there is online tutoring available, and that I know last semester some students complained that it was hard to get an appointment, you know, that the amount of tutors they had were overwhelmed. I don't know if that's still the case, but it might be worth it. So I have in the announcement here, there's just a link to where you can schedule it. And then the other announcements, again, that everybody should be able to see, but people don't always recognize that they're there. The one is that I have this additional study content page. So in addition to the read, study, and practice section that Wiley Plus provides, which is actually a really awesome tool, and I'll show you that in a minute, I provide additional study content. I teach this same course for a college in Arizona. That's actually my full-time job. I'm a teacher at a college in southern Arizona. And so I just do this one section per semester for BYU. But when you click on the link there in the announcements, it'll take you to my additional study content page, which in essence has, I've recorded lectures for each of these chapter topics. There's some self-tests, which are like practice tests. They don't impact your grade at all, but some people think they're helpful. There's usually a B version of at least one of the problems in the homework, sometimes multiple ones that I've recorded a tutorial for, and then a quick review of each chapter. So that's all in there for you if you want any of it. It's not mandatory, it's not part of your grade, but it's just additional study content for people who want it. So that's one thing I just like to point out is always there in each weekly announcement. I have it down there under other news.
Okay, so it's there every week.
Yep.
In that section. Okay.
There's always a link to it. Right. And then the other thing is on the exams. So most of the people tell me that they think the exams in this class are hard. And that's not said to scare anybody. It's like just a heads up that's a consistent refrain. And what I found is yeah, they're challenging exams, but some people miss that when there's an exam, there's a study guide. And so I'm just going to go down and show you where to find that. So any week where there's an exam, let's see, so probably week. So in week 3, in week 3 we have exam 1, and always right above the exam link is a review. So week 3 review, exam 1. And if you click on that review, it takes you to this page. And sometimes people miss it because it's down here on number 5. There's this checklist for the exam. And if you click on that, it opens up a PDF document. And this PDF is really cool because it has in essence a exam study guide for each exam. And so if you go in there, it'll tell you kind of the primary topics. And what I did once is I didn't make this exam study guide. I think it was done by, you know, the way they do these courses at BYU Idaho. As an instructor, I don't really create the content in the course. Right. It's all created in a master course, and then I'm just supposed to facilitate it. The only content I've really added to the course are the extra credit discussions, the spiritual discussions that I've added in. Everything else is pre-made. Anyway, so I went and looked through the exam, And in essence, whoever made this study guide just looked at the exam questions and then wrote one of these, each of these bullet points. So they're based on someone reading it saying, okay, what topic do they need to cover to answer this exam question? So it's really a nice tool for studying, I guess is what I'm getting at. So again, you can find that by going to the modules and going to a module with an exam in it. So module 3 is our first, or week 3 is our first one with an exam, and clicking on the review, and then it's down at the bottom under, it's called a checklist. And it, like I said, it gives you the PDF that actually covers all the exams. Some people like to print it or just save that PDF, and so they don't have to go back and find it each time.
So can I ask, so on number 2, is that a place where you can also study for the exam then? On that?
It is. So in the read, study, practice, that was the other thing I was going to show you. So that link will take you there, but I'll just come back in the modules to show you where it is. Sorry, that's the instructor module. You wouldn't see that on yours, but textbook access, Wiley Plus, read, study, practice. And when you open that up, it gives you these tools, and there's some for each chapter, and there's tons of resources. So here's where you can see the e-textbook that looks like a book. Some people just prefer that as opposed to the reading content. So up here's the e-book. Here's some, I guess, selected content from each chapter. Then this Orion Build Your Proficiency, and you can see there's a link to it here. I once did a little study and found that students who worked with Orion until they had a mastery level of 80% or higher tended to score about 10 to 12 percentage points higher on the exams than students who didn't use it, because it's not mandatory. And you know, so a lot of people are just like, I don't have time to do another thing. But students who did better. And then there's a whole bunch of other resources, PowerPoints, audio reviews, solution walkthroughs for a lot of the exercises and problems or things similar to them. So there's a lot of resources here that I think people miss as being available. Anyway, so that's kind of the general information I wanted to cover. Any questions about general information before we start talking about accounting specific information?
Well, I got the book, the hard copy, because I like to underline, and and it looks like a really good book to keep too. I do notice that they have issues. Like if you go to, they have the wrong page numbers. Okay,
like they don't match up perfectly.
Yeah, it was like the glossary. It'll say go to page 5 for this, and it's like, no, that's on page such and such. That's not on. Or even in the book, there were places where it would say your illustration 1.20 or whatever is on page, but it's not.
It doesn't match up.
Okay. No, so they need to fix that. But other than that, that's a minor issue. But.
Well, yeah, and I don't know that it can be fixed in essence, because you're working with, I think the e-textbook gets updated live as opposed to printed forms which don't get updated. But I don't know what, you know, that's a Wiley issue and that's the thing is I'll get a lot of student questions about Wiley, and honestly, I have zero control over what Wiley does or doesn't do. And so I always feel bad, but I'm always referring people like, you're going to have to contact Wiley support because I can't change any of that content that's built in there. You know, unfortunately, and then I feel like I'm being a jerk because I can't fix their problem. I like to fix problems, but I can't always.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
If you look through the exam, do you know if the exam is going to be similar to the questions that are given in the homework and in the quiz, or is it going to be like a BYU format?
Yeah, like that's a good question. So the exams, this is a complaint we often hear from students, is people feel like the exams feel different than the homework. For one thing, the homework is usually problem-based and the exams are multiple choice. I will say that the exams are written by Wiley, so the same content provider that's providing the homework is providing the exams. And that's why in my additional study stuff, I have some of these practice exams, because those come right from Wiley. And the practice tests feel more like what you'll see in the exam.
Do we have to write any numbers in the exam? Like
Yes,
fill
so
in the blanks?
yes, sometimes there's a fill in the blank and sometimes it's multiple choice.
Okay. I had issues with, it's kind of silly, but it was like telling me to round to the nearest, and I did, but then it marked wrong. So I was like, oh, I hope nothing like that is on the exam, because then I'll miss it, even though like I was right.
Right. So I will tell you that if we recognize an issue like that on an exam, I will go and I'll check it, by hand, so to speak, and then change people's grades. But I will say that in my experience doing this for years and years now, more often than not, it's not the program that has the problem. It was that somebody actually rounded wrong, or it said round up, but they rounded it off, or something like that. So always, if you feel like there's an issue, you can let me know, and I will go check it. And if you got cheated by the system, I'll give you the points back. And then the other thing I do, in addition to giving the points back, I file an error report with Wiley, and they've been pretty responsive at correcting things if we notice them. But it's been relatively few over the years.
Okay, thank you.
So just, I'm going to bring up whoops, that's not what we want. That's from a different class I'm teaching. I'm going to bring up Accounting 201. Just a couple little slides here, with some content that maybe is easy for you, or maybe not. Okay. Are you no longer seeing my screen?
No.
Okay. Hold on a second. Things are being weird. Story of my life. Things are weird. Okay, I think I got it. Except that I got the wrong thing up again now. What in the world is going on here? Okay. Zoom is giving me some weird problems. I apologize. Okay. There we go. So now I think you can see that one, right?
Yes.
Income statement. So this first chapter, and I know you've already started into the work, and so this might be just like a quick review for you. But in essence, there's the 4 financial statements that we're looking at, just getting an overview of in this chapter. The first is the income statement, and it summarizes revenue and expenses over a period of time. And so you can see the example we have on there is the Sierra Corporation, and this is their income statement for the month of October 2017. And so this format is a pretty standard format where you'll have a column on the right that has your totals. So that's their total service revenue, 10,600. And then a column on the left for the totals of each of the sub accounts under expenses. And then you can see the total expenses are 7740, and then the revenue minus the expenses is the net income. So common mistakes people make when they're making an income statement is they'll show expenses as negatives because it doesn't seem that illogical to do so. But the way these are set up, they always show the numbers as positives, just like this. So that's the income statement. The income statement flows into, so the net income number that you get on that income statement, it flows into the statement of retained earnings. So there on the left is our income statement that we just had. And then on the statement of retained earnings, we have, in essence, the retained earnings at the beginning of the period, so at October 1st, and we add any net income. And if you think about it, net income is just money that the business made, right? What they brought in minus what they had to pay out to do business that month, or during that period, whatever the length of that period is. And then we subtract dividends, and dividends are amounts paid out to the owners of the business. And whatever is left over at the end is the retained earnings at the end of the period. So in essence, there's really only two ways for a business to have equity in a business. One is that the owners will contribute that in by purchasing the stock of a business if it's a corporation, or just by making an owner contribution if it's a partnership or a sole proprietorship. And then the other is that the business can retain earnings. In other words, it can make a profit and then not give that profit back to the owners. And businesses will do this most often because they want to have some money to operate with. I own a business. It's a storage rental facility, and I want to put a new electronic gate in. So even though I made a profit, I don't necessarily pay all that profit out to people because I want to save that up so I can buy a new gate system. Patricia, you have a question?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Yes, does the order matter when building the income statement?
So as far as revenues coming first and then expenses, yes. As far as the order the expenses are in, it doesn't typically matter. That being said, sometimes you will see a problem in a homework set where it will tell you to list the expenses in some specific order, like alphabetical order, or from the largest to the smallest. But normally speaking, no, expense order doesn't matter.
And is there, I don't know if I have to memorize like all the items that goes under the expenses, but is there like an easier way to remember them?
Well, with revenues and expenses, it's relatively easy because they usually have revenue or expense in their name. So that helps. When we get to some of the other things, like when we look at the balance sheet and we have assets and liabilities and equities, there you just have to start to learn what type of account
It's like,
each of those are. I'll give you a couple of key words that will help remembering some of them, but
keywords for the balance.
Yeah, well, like assets, so anything that has receivable in its name is an asset. Things like that we can. But let me move to that. I just want to make sure I answered Patricia's question enough that I can move on to the next section and without.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So our statement of retained earnings flows into our balance sheet. A balance sheet is a summary of all the assets, the liabilities, and the stockholders' equity of a corporation or of a company. It doesn't have to be a corporation at a given moment in time. So whereas the income statement measured a period of time, like a month or a year, a balance sheet just gives you the balances at a given moment. So at the end of October in this case. So here you can see on the balance sheet, it summarizes the assets, the liabilities, and then stockholders' equity. So as I was saying, assets are just things that you own. Okay, so the business owns. The most common is cash, and then accounts receivable represents money that the customers owe the business. So anything that has receivable in its name is going to be an asset. These other things like supplies and equipment, those are pretty tangible, and we kind of get what those are. We know what supplies are to do our work, or equipment, or a building, or land. But this one, prepaid insurance, is a little more confusing. This is where a lot of people will
Sorry.
That's all right. A lot of people will pay like a whole year's worth of insurance, or they'll pay their rent for 6 months in advance. When you do that, in essence, what it does is it creates a claim to that insurance or to the use of that building that you're renting for a period of time. And so what we do is when we actually pay that is we create an asset called prepaid insurance or prepaid rent. And then as we use up that asset by staying in the building or by using the insurance, we reduce the asset and claim it as an expense. So that's what a prepaid asset is. And we'll learn more about it in detail when we go forward.
So equipment is part of the asset, but how come land or building is not listed in there?
Because this business doesn't have a land or building. They must
okay.
They must be renting their place or something, but that is where it would go.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are all assets. Okay. Liabilities are money you owe to someone else. So often they have the term payable in their name, notes payable, accounts payable. Anything that says payable is a liability. There's one in here that doesn't. It's a tricky one because it says revenue in its name, and that makes you think it's a revenue, but it's an unearned revenue. And that comes about when somebody pays you in advance for money you haven't earned yet. So it's a liability because you either owe them the services that you're going to provide, or you owe them their money back. This happens a lot in my business where people will pay me for a year's worth of storage in advance. And so I have to record that money as a liability, showing that I owe them the use of my storage facility for the next year. And so then what I do is each month I do an adjusting entry where I reduce the amount of the liability and increase the amount of revenue, showing that I actually earned it. But typically, so when I talked about keywords, having payable in your name means you're a liability. And most liabilities have that. Unearned revenue is an exception. And then stockholders' equity, we have the common stock. That's the money that the owners have put into the business. And the retained earnings, which is what I discussed just a moment ago on the statement of retained earnings, which is any net income of the business that hasn't been paid out as dividends. That's the retained earnings. So the way this works is it flows from the income statement where we calculate our net income. We use our net income to calculate our retained earnings, and then our retained earnings flow into the stockholders' equity section of the balance sheet. The final statement is the statement of cash flows. And we'll learn in the future why this is so important, because sometimes the revenues and expenses on our income statement don't always get paid in cash right away. Like sometimes we'll do service for somebody, but they won't pay us till the next month. Or sometimes they'll pay us in advance, like I just mentioned with unearned revenue, but we're not going to do the work until 3 months down the road. Or sometimes we'll have an expense like payroll, where people are working and we actually owe them money, but we haven't yet paid it in cash. So the statement of cash flows helps us understand where our actual cash is at. A business, if you think about an income statement, a business could run at a loss and survive, not indefinitely, but they could run at a loss for a couple years if they have enough savings or things like that to work off of. And so the income statement and the statement of retained earnings and the balance sheet, the three of those together give us a picture of what's going on in a business, and then we can see trends. And if we see our net income, being a net loss multiple years in a row, we know we've got to change something or the business is going to die. But our statement of cash flows, it tells us how much cash we have, and that's a more immediate thing. So if the first three are like a cancer screening or something for a business, the statement of cash flows is more like an EKG. It's checking the heartbeat, the thing that's going to kill us right away if we don't take care of it. So the statement of cash flows shows the cash that comes in from our operating activities. That's selling stuff to customers and paying the costs of that. Investing, which is purchasing the equipment and, in other words, the long-term assets we need to run the business. And financing, that would be bringing money in through borrowing or through stock and paying it out as dividends or paying off those loans. And so That's what's summarized there. We're going to get much more specific on each of these things as we move forward. So it's not meant to be an exhaustive study of them in this first chapter. It's meant to just sort of introduce them to you. And so that's all I have as far as maybe a little presentation on the coursework. Can I answer any other questions about the things I just went over, or any questions about specific?
Can you bring back up the cash flow thing?
Sure. Hopefully I don't have another crazy problem when I try to do it.
I do have a question, but it can be at the end because it's about week chapter 2.
Okay.
Okay.
You can go ahead, Janice.
Okay. Yeah, I was having a hard time remembering what went on each statement. So I think you helped me with the payable, because the liabilities are expenses.
Well, so no, they're not. They're
not expenses.
Right. They're money we owe to people. So expenses are expenses. Those are not necessarily things we owe. Okay. So they're instead things that we've paid already. So we don't record costs we've incurred, would be a good way of putting it.
So expenses are things that have already been paid out.
Or that, well, not necessarily. Okay. That was a confusing way to put it.
Okay.
The way I put it, I apologize. So expenses are costs we've incurred. So when we incur a cost, let's say, for example, we incur a cost like wage and salary expense. There's 2 ways we can pay for that cost. One is we can reduce an asset like cash to pay our wage and salary expense. The other is we could have a liability, meaning we owe that money. So a liability means that we owe money for something.
So that's why it says salaries and wage payable is a liability.
Right.
But then
that arises from incurring salary and wage expense but not paying it yet.
So that is something that would show up on an income statement, and
this salary and wage expense would show up on an income statement.
Right.
But not the payable.
But salary and wage payable is not
on the balance sheet.
It's just I'm looking at them going, okay, now what do I put next? And that the cash flow, that was, I've been working on chapter 1. I'm not on chapter 2 yet. Trying to determine what goes under each of those in the homework problems was a little mind-boggling.
So a good way of thinking about it is pretty much all things that would be revenues and expenses, if they're cash, are part of operating. Okay. We have to be careful because sometimes you'll incur an expense and not pay it yet. So really it's any payments that you've made to suppliers or any money you've received from customers.
So operating is payments to someone or money received from someone?
From money received from customers.
Oh, but so it just says cash. So it's either cash being received or cash payments.
Right. But everything on here is cash receipts and cash payments. So operating activities is just those cash receipts or payments related to running the business. So I'll give you an example. I own a business and I receive rents from my customers, and I have to pay my insurance and I have to pay my utilities and all of those things. Those are all operating costs. So any cash I receive from customers or any money I pay for those operating costs, that would be the operating activities. If I, as the owner of the business, decided to invest in my business, put another $10,000 in my business to help me buy that electronic gate I want, that's not an operating activity. Okay, that's a financing activity because I'm getting money into the business, not from selling stuff to somebody, just from an owner investing in it.
So operating is cash from customers or paying
to vendors or suppliers or whatever term you want to use.
Okay.
And then investing activities are using the business's money to purchase long-term assets such as land, building, equipment, or the selling off of those assets.
So if you purchase it or if you sell it, it's under invest?
If it's a long-term asset, not if it's your normal inventory that you would know. That's, selling inventory is part of your operating. So if my business, if I buy and sell, if I'm selling customers boxes and locks, that'd be part of my operating activities. But if I sell off a moving van that belongs to my business, and I'm not in the business of normally selling moving vans, I just have an old one that I'm replacing, so I'm selling it off, that's an investing activity. So it's sort of the purchase or sale of large assets that are not the normal thing I would sell. Does that make sense?
Whereas operating is
the things I normally
smaller.
sell. Yes, and it's the things that I'm in the business of selling.
Okay. And then finances.
So financing
is your stock.
Right. So that would be if I found another partner and they put money into the business, I sold them a share of ownership in the business. That'd be a form of financing. Or if I went to the bank and borrowed money, or if I paid a dividend.
So the note payable is like you borrowed money from a bank.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I think that helped.
Okay, I'm glad.
I hope so.
It's one of those things that's kind of like, it's just, if you haven't done much of it, then then the terminology is new. It's like learning not like learning a whole new language, but like learning a new way of classifying things and putting them in, into categories that you're not accustomed to. It'll come along like anything else when you do more of it.
Like you were saying, they were listed as positives.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm in the spreadsheet that I've used for a while, I subtracted because I used it, right?
Well, and you'll see in the statement of cash flows, it actually does show increases to cash as positive and decreases as negatives. And that's part of why it's so confusing, because on an income statement, it doesn't do that. And so it just takes getting used to the standardized format.
Yeah. So I have someone helping with the new spreadsheet, and he's like, well, the way he set it up, if I put a positive number, that's subtracting, and if I put a negative, that's adding, and that's really baffling to me.
Yeah, a lot of accounting software does stuff like that, and you're like, why make it harder than it has to be?
Well, if it's positive, it's positive. Why do I put a negative in front of a positive? So it's like, I'm gonna leave it like this because maybe I'll run into this in accounting. So, anyway.
Okay, so Patricia, what was your question?
It is, sorry, it's getting a little ahead, but it's been holding me down back. So I wanted to ask you, in the earnings per share formula, the preferred dividends, all the problems that that is in the homework, that I had to use this formula, I was really confused because I couldn't find the preferred dividend. So I just assumed it was zero and ended up being right. But why would they even put there?
Well, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
So preferred dividends are relatively rare. In other words, a lot of companies don't issue preferred stock. And so most of the time when you're calculating earnings per share, there's no preferred dividends to deal with. But I think the thinking of the textbook authors was that they would be remiss if they didn't let you know that in the case where you are dealing with a company that has preferred stock, that you do have to subtract out those preferred dividends. That's all. I think it's confusing too. I noticed that the first semester I used this Wiley Plus that they do that to people, and people are looking all over the place for preferred dividends, but there's none on a lot of the problems. So the thing with preferred dividends on these problems is unless they specifically state it, then assumes there's none.
Where would it be if it was somewhere to be found.
So if we were looking at a real corporation, it would be in their statement of retained earnings. We could find their dividends separated out. In these kind of canned homework problems, it would be in all the information they provide to you. Like they usually list a bunch of different values of net income and things like that. They would list preferred dividends. I would prefer it if they would tell you preferred dividends is 0. I think that would make it less confusing. But I'm not on the editorial board for Wiley Plus, so I guess they don't care what I think. So it would have to be in the information they give you. So if it's not in that information, then there's no preferred dividends.
Okay. The other question I wanted to ask you is about that rule that total assets equal total liabilities and
Stockholders' equity.
Is that always going to be the case? Because sometimes, when you're looking, it's going to be missing an information. I wanted to know if it's always going to be that rule.
Yes, assets always equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity. It's kind of like a fundamental rule of accounting that those things have to equal each other. The whole system would not work if they didn't. So if you ever are in a situation where your assets don't equal your liabilities plus your equity, you're missing something.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have to know all of the accounting, the generally accepted accounting principles?
What do you mean have to know them?
Like each I guess I don't even know what to call it. Like this SEC, PCAOB. Do we have to know like what it means and what they do?
You probably need to know about the Securities and Exchange Commission, and you probably need to know. You'll see some test questions on that type of material. So use that study guide. It will really help you narrow your studying down. The one I mentioned earlier. As far as off the top of my head, me remembering exactly which things, I can't tell you exactly, but I know that there's a test question or two about like these entities that are responsible for GAAP and then you mentioned Sarbanes-Oxley Act. If you study business for any amount of time, you'll get sick of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. It's kind of the most recent big overhaul, and they talk about it a lot.
Oh, okay.
But, in my mind, this is not a class that's about that. It's about learning the fundamentals of accounting. And so I don't put a ton of time into that, but just use the test review to help you kind of narrow down what you need to, what are things I need to memorize? What are things I just need to be familiar with?
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions that I had.
All right. Great. Is there anything else before we finish up? All right. So I'll end with a prayer, and we'll call it a night. Thanks for your participation. Our dear Father in heaven, we express our gratitude to Thee for BYU Idaho and the vast reach of online classes that we have students all over the world who can participate and be edified through these things. We pray that the things they'll learn in this class will strengthen their ability in their jobs and improve their employability and improve their ability to do their family and business finances as needed. We love Thee, and we're grateful for this opportunity, and we're especially grateful for our Savior Jesus Christ and His atonement. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.